Tonight from Paris, the screenwriter Jean-Claude Carriere. Hello. Over the last 30 years, few European writers have made as significant a contribution to cinema as Jean-Claude Carriere. He's written over 70 screenplays, from Buñuel's last 6 films, through works like Danton and The Tin Drum, to the recent hit Cyrano de Bergerac. He doesn't only write for the cinema, he's written plays as well as films with Peter Brook for the last 15 years, and he has several novels to his name. But for tonight's film, we've chosen to concentrate on Carriere's work as a screenwriter, a medium where acclaim usually goes to the actors and director. But we do this in order to explore the particular collaborative demands of that craft. Here's Jean-Claude Carriere.
I began by writing novels with drawings when I was 10 years old, and then when I was 12, I remember I wrote a tragedy, a classical tragedy, and then the first thing I had published was a novel written when I was 23, before getting into the movie field. To Jacques Tati. Tati had a contract with my publisher to publish 2 books based on 2 films, Mr. Hulot's Holidays and My Uncle. So I went to see Tati with my heart beating, you know, like I was 24. And he said, "What do you know about how to make a film?" And I said, precisely nothing, monsieur. You have never been in a studio or anything? No, never. So he called his editing woman, Suzanne Baron, and he said to her this very mysterious phrase. He said, "Suzanne, take this young gentleman and show him what cinema is." Very strange. So she took me in her small dark room. It was like penetrating in the initiatic grotto.
Action.
And she told me my first lesson, which I never forgot. She told me all the problem is to go from the script to the film. You know, to go from paper to film. That's all. Because the script is like a dream for a film. You can imagine anything you want, that you have the best location, the best actors, but when you have to go from the script to the film, you have to make some small concessions all the time. And the problem is to choose which ones you can allow yourself to make and which ones you cannot. Hello. Hello.
How are you? Good.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
What are you working on? Another film? Sure.
No, last day today.
Last day?
Yeah.
What are you? Last day.
Yeah.
What are you shooting?
We're,
Another love
shooting.
scene? I was watching Lena on the set, you know, faking a love scene once again, you know. These scenes are as difficult to shoot as they are to write.
I'm sure.
How can you write? They make love.
Right.
They start making love. Doesn't
Right.
mean a thing. Always, you know, love scenes are too short, or breakdowns there. Right? What can we do? Cinema is not an idea. Cinema is a fact. It's the making of a film, which is very important to know when you are a screenwriter.
But what happened?
Happy anniversary!
Oh, now, really, dear.
Come and see. I'll show you how it works. We'll just walk in. There, no more keys. Happy?
Happy anniversary!
A new one!
Go see.
Oh,
I remember in My Uncle a scene in which there is a dog with the tail of the dog is maneuvering an electronic eye. And due to this passage in front of the eye, the door of the garage closes and the two characters are prisoners inside, I remember. And the whole problem was that he didn't want to shoot a close-up on the tail. He wanted to have the dog in a large frame, you know, from a certain distance.
Oh, Jackie, come here.
Jackie!
And the only question was, is the tail visible? Is it clear that it is the tail which provokes the closing of the door of the garage? Weeks on these questions, you know, I remember perfectly well. And he was very right to tell me that this is cinema. It is sort of bricolage, as we say in French. It's sort of everyday small work and small questions and mending this, repairing this, changing, trying this, and making some mistakes from time to time and being obliged to reshoot things, you know.
We do another one.
At the time when you were starting to write screenplays, there was the Nouvelle Vague, the New Wave.
It was the very beginning. I'm exactly the same generation, you know, that as Godard, Truffaut, we are all the same age.
And that put the emphasis firmly on the director, the auteur theory and so on. What was your view of that at the time? What's your view now?
This new concept really pleased me a lot and still pleases me. And it is the problem of my life, is to try to disappear as a storyteller into somebody else's writing, into the writing, into even the conception of the director. That's the reason why I'm working all the time with the director closely from the very beginning, to try to make the two films we are working on one film, which is absolutely important. But the main thing is that apart from the director, the writer, the producer, and all the others, there is another strength, which is the strength of the film itself, which is above all the others. If we agree on sacrificing our personal views from time to time to the leading necessity of the film, in that case we have a chance to reach a good point.
The fact that he's such a good collaborator for directors is because he has no ego. And from the beginning, it's maybe a question of generation, or maybe being French and having come of age at the time of the Nouvelle Vague, the New Wave. There's never been any doubt for us that you know, cinema is essentially the director. It's the director's art, and that writing is tremendously important. But finally, the screenplay is a sort of a step, or a blueprint, or whatever you want to call it. But it's not. It doesn't exist by itself. When I met him for Viva Maria, I had this weird idea to make a film with Brigitte Bardot and Jeanne Moreau, who were by far the biggest French stars in the 60s. And I started working on the concept of the script, which was a sort of a buddy film with two women, which is unusual. Viva Maria is the comic tale of two women, part of a troupe of traveling entertainers who become icons in a peasant's revolution, but only after importing le striptease from Paris to Mexico.
For a young writer, I mean, I was young, there were many attractions in the film, not even talking about the two actresses, which are beautiful. But the fact to go to Mexico for the first time in my life, to discover a new culture, a new landscape, a new world, to try to recreate the atmosphere of talking about explorations in the rest of the world, when the world was still a mystery for us. And trying also to illustrate a certain eroticism for the people who could have been our grandmothers, grandfathers.
It's always interested me how, especially in the comic side of films, how you test that it's comic. It's very easy in the theatre. People laugh or
Yeah,
they
of
don't.
course.
And it's quite easy in a book because you give it to people and you say, did you laugh on page 19? But in the cinema, you're putting it together in such small bits.
I remember...
and you're not editing it generally until the filming is finished.
Luis Buñuel told me, he was a very good friend of Chaplin, and they worked together. Nobody knows that. He worked as a gagman for Chaplin.
Buñuel worked as a
Buñuel,
gagman
yes,
for Chaplin.
and they were very good friends.
On what? Can you remember?
On City Lights, for instance, and some other films. And one day he was invited by Chaplin to the first screening at the studio of City Lights, where there is this famous scene with the whistle, you know, where he swallows a whistle and go, oh, you remember that scene? You know? And he told me that that scene lasts for 25 minutes. So at the very beginning it was very funny, like it is in the film. It means that even Chaplin, who knew better than anybody else how to make comic films, made an extraordinary mistake. It's always very difficult to be right on the timing and the time. That's Buñuel waiting for me in the bar with the cocktail. That's me drawing myself, and that's Buñuel, his face, with the famous razor for the Andalusian dog.
Buñuel was someone with whom you worked on half a dozen films, on 6 films.
19 years.
Was it? Yes.
And the two of us having a lunch together in the restaurant of the hotel. We have eaten together, just the two of us, more than 2,000 times.
What brought you together in the first instance?
Just a question he asked me when we met for the first time. We had a lunch, and the first phrase he asked me, and I felt it was not a superficial question at all, but a real deep one, you know, with this fantastic eyes, you know, where seeing everything in a room, including on the sides. He asked me, do you drink wine? And I said the truth. I said, not only I drink wine, I produce wine. I'm from a family of wine growers. So his face, you know, got luminous and very happy, and he ordered 2 bottles. And from that, the first thing we shared was wine.
How important do you think he was as a filmmaker, as an influence, as a force in the artistic life of this century?
It's very difficult to answer. In some countries like England and even France, he is still considered as a surrealistic filmmaker, which in a certain way makes him apart, you know, in a certain classification. But if you go to Spain or to Mexico or South America, Buñuel is not on the sides. He is really in the center of many different traditions, including literary traditions in Spain. And you can't avoid him. If you are a novelist, you can't avoid Picasso. Picasso is a great painter, but he's only a painter. You know, you can't, if you are today a Spanish novelist, you can't go without Buñuel. At one moment of your life, you are going to meet him, to face him, and you better know it before you start writing.
I'd like to talk about 2 films you made with him, but also about your working methods. When you made The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, how did you set about writing that? What happened?
We met for The Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie without having the slightest idea of what we were going to write. we had only one word, and the word was repetition. A story that repeats itself, in a way. For no reasons, for mysterious reasons, that we never try to clarify, Buñuel was extremely attracted to the idea of repeating phrases, gestures, attitudes, actions. And we decided to put this in the center of a story. And we start working when Serge Silberman, the producer, arrived, and he said, oh, times are bad, you know, I'm losing my head. I don't know what happened to me last week. What happened to you? Just, you know, having a drink as a normal talk, even a chat. And he said, well, I met some friends from Brazil in Paris, and I invited them to have a dinner to my place, or let's say on Tuesday night. And I'm so busy that I forgot to tell my wife about this, and I forgot that myself, I had a dinner out on the same day. So what happened? On Tuesday night, 9 o'clock, my wife was already ready to go to bed or watch TV. She was in a nightgown. She had eaten slightly.
Vous ne nous attendiez pas?
Ah non, pas ce soir.
Pas ce soir?
And they rang the door, and there were 4 people there bringing flowers and coming for dinner. And I wasn't there.
Henri nous avait invités pour ce soir.
So I looked at Buñuel, and he looked at me, and we immediately felt that there was something quite interesting in that situation. The story of a group of people who could try to just a very simple action, to eat together, and they could never reach their common joy.
Je vous proposerais bien de partager mon dîner, seulement je n'ai vraiment rien de prêt. Je suis vraiment désolée.
Mais ne vous excusez pas, ce n'est rien.
Un petit malentendu.
That's the way the Discreet Charm really started. Due thanks Serge Silberman.
But then it became more and more extreme, so, and then we had...
Oh, we worked for 2 years on the script, I mean, stopping from time to time. Usually we worked closely, you know, working with Buñuel meant living with Buñuel, just the 2 of us, no friends, no women, and being closely together, eating together 3 times a day, walking together, drinking together, just to get to some obsession about the script. Of course, we couldn't stand it more than 4 or 5 weeks. You know, that was the maximum. If not, we would have exploded. So, after 5 weeks, we would abandon everything and forget about the film to let a sort of invisible work in the subconscious, you know, continue. We all know that we have unconscious thoughts, and maybe more than thoughts, desires, wills, secrets. If we don't give them way, if we don't give them the possibility to express themselves, when we are not thinking about them, if we try all the time to work with the same tension and clarity of an open mind, we miss a lot.
So you think it's good to stop every so often?
Absolutely. It's not good, it's necessary. And I do it all the time.
Is there anything that specifically marked him out about his imagination? Would he do this that nobody else did, or that nobody else did? Nobody else in your experience?
The work with Buñuel essentially was a work to provoke the imagination. Knowing very well that imagination is a muscle, like memory is. It's a muscle of the brain. As a muscle, it might be trained, like any muscle. And for instance, if there was something very specific about Buñuel's working with Buñuel, it was that every day, at the end of the afternoon, when we already started being tired, at let's say 6:30, we would spend half an hour alone in our rooms, trying to invent a story in half an hour. And then we would meet in the bar, and each of us had the obligation every day to tell his story to the other one. And it was just to train that mysteriously located muscle, you know. That's something that really Buñuel taught me, and which I still practice almost every day, alone or with different other people.
And you really do think it builds things up, too? Builds up the imagination?
It teaches you that imagination is limitless. And it teaches you, secondly, that imagination is always faultless, innocent, that there is no crime in thinking about a crime. Not only there is no crime, but there is a real obligation for a screenwriter, for any writer in the world, every day, as Buñuel would say, to kill his father, to rape his mother, to betray his country. He has to do it in his mind. If not, he deprives himself or herself of a huge territory of imagination.
Il faut un E, hein, il faut un
Ah oui.
On est bien, oui.
Oui.
There is something else about the work of a screenwriter with Buñuel and other directors. It starts with acting. It means we are sitting in front of each other. There is a table, some paper, and that's all.
Oui, c'est bien. Les deux choses sont bien, les deux changements sont bien, parce que j'aimais pas tellement non plus le côté...
Ça vous agace
beaucoup si je vous dis ce que nous allons faire.
We have to give form to what we say. So immediately, as soon as one of us gets an idea, he's trying to show the other what it is, what it's about, what he dreams of. There is the very beginning of a direction and of an acting.
Oui. Lui, il repasse à un moment donné. Il va à la fenêtre.
Peut-être qu'il se lève, peut-être il va...
Il retourne à la fenêtre, il regarde, oui.
Il regarde autour de lui, il cherche, et puis il revient sans la regarder, elle le suit, et à ce moment-là, il lui dirait... Je te suis... Oui, quoi?
Oui, voilà.
In other words, Buñuel could say, and I would approve, that when you can really act a scene, then you can write it.
Je vous obéis comme un soldat. Oui, là, non, juste la fin de la scène pour voir. Là.
Jean-Claude n'est pas quelqu'un qui se prépare, quoi. Il est un petit peu... qui se prépare à un travail. Il préfère découvrir les choses, découvrir les problèmes que le scénario pose. Il est un petit peu comme un acteur qui... Vous savez, Gérard Depardieu, par exemple, grand acteur, ne se prépare pas du tout. Il préfère découvrir les scènes quand il a à les jouer et ne pas se faire des idées à l'avance sur la manière dont il va jouer. Son inspiration, elle lui vient sur le moment, au moment du tournage. Eh bien, Jean-Claude, c'est un peu comme ça. Son inspiration, elle lui vient sur le moment quand il a sous les yeux un texte existant, et ce texte lui inspire quelque chose, mais il n'aime pas trop, les conversations autour du sujet. Il préfère le travail réel sur les mots.
We all possess a little theater here inside. So when we work alone, we see the actors and the movements and the faces on this private stage that we all have here. When we are two to work together, there is a real possibility to take them out of our private theater just to show them to the other and to give them, I would say, the beginning of a life.
How would that happen, say, in the Phantom of Liberty, that very funny sequence where they go for dinner and sit down at table not to eat? Now, how did that come about?
We were extremely tempted by a sort of, how could I say, ethnical, or anthropological approach of ourselves, of our society. And we went, once again, to the eating, to the fact of eating together. There is a something that links the Phantom to the discrete chapter of the bourgeoisie in that precise scene you are talking about. But in the same time, we wanted to make it the opposite way around. And we thought that it could be sort of interesting to imagine that our social habits are totally reversed for once in a film. And that gave the scene.
You must have had a lot of fun working all the...
Oh, yes, especially acting this was very funny.
Quelle présence. C'est dommage qu'elle est un peu grossie. Prenez une cigarette. Vraiment pas.
Volontiers, merci.
Et votre voyage en Espagne, à propos?
Oh, très intéressant. Mais
quoi?
Nous avons dû rentrer plus tôt que prévu. Oui, dans les rues de Madrid, le matin, il y a une odeur absolument écœurante de... Excusez-moi, hein, de nourriture. Vraiment impudique.
Maman, j'ai très faim.
Voyons, Sophie, on ne dit pas ces mots-là à table, c'est très mal élevé.
I must add to that scene that one detail, sometimes it's one detail that gives you the scene.
Pardon, Rousseau, la salle à manger, s'il vous plaît.
La dernière porte au fond du couloir à droite.
And the detail in that scene was, I remember when I told Luis, at one point, one man could be eating alone in the closet, and somebody else with the same tray is trying to open the door, and the one inside says, it's busy. So, and that, you know, when you find something like this, you really want to see it on the screen.
C'est occupé.
Oh, pardon.
Some very good books I have been offered to make films out of them. I just refused. Under the Volcano, for instance, with Buñuel. We couldn't find a film through the book. And in the teen room, in the book there is no dialogue at all. But the material is fantastic for a film.
Ich erblickte das Licht dieser Welt in Gestalt einer 60 Glühbirne.
Es ist ein Jungchen!
Wusste ich doch, dass es ein Jungchen ist. Auch wenn ich manchmal gesagt habe, es wird nimmer hell.
It's a special way to read a book when you think about making a film. It's to try, like a transparent reading, to see if there is a film waiting for you behind the book. In other words, if the material, the scenes, the characters, even if the scenes are not existing yet, but if there is a possibility for a writer and a filmmaker to tell the same story using the means of actors, scenes, and acting. You know, it's a totally different way of reading a book as a book.
You're saying that the film is behind the book. There's a sequence very near the beginning, where Oscar is watching his mother play the piano and her lover is fondling her, and the others are having dinner and so on. And he's deciding that he's not going to grow up, that he doesn't want to belong to this world. Now, how did you see that? Can you talk about that particular scene, that particular sequence, as it were, behind the book? It's a very well-shot, well-made sequence, I think.
I can talk, but I can talk in a very clumsy way. Because in that particular scene, which gives the strength and even the meaning of the scene, is the look of David Bennett. And that you can't write. You can't write down, is going to look in such a way that we will understand that. No, it's impossible. In a certain way, you have to trust the actor.
Und was schon klar, also trinken wir auf die Rentenmarkt und deine 3 nicht.
That's exactly what I said about something new must happen during the shooting. It's exactly what happened in that scene. It means that when we saw the scene, we were happily surprised that it was not only the same intentions that we had in the script with totally different means, but it was even better, because a look like the look of David Bennett at that moment is very strong, precise, gives meaningful, but in the same time, for certain spectators, it is ambiguous.
Another adaptation was The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Now, some people would have thought that that was a difficult novel to take on because, because of the philosophical wrappings. That was the view at the time. This was a philosophical novel by Kundera, and therefore the most difficult to take on, the furthest away from a film.
The main thing to do when you write an adaptation from a book is not to illustrate the book, to be faithful to the book doesn't mean a thing. The main thing is to make a film. It means that at one precise moment you have to close the book, to leave it in your drawer, and to make a film. You have absolutely to gain your freedom as a filmmaker. So in that case, I knew, rereading the book, that the philosophical aspect could be, in a way, maintained in the film, kept in the film, but in a different way. What was most important, as usual, was the action. And I felt the action in the book, the hidden action, was very good. All the elements were there. A love story between a man and a woman, and with the obstacle number one, the Russian tanks. And there is a scene in this film which I often quote as a different way of expressing ourselves in a novel and in a film. As the scene when the Russian tanks are coming over in Prague. The scene is like this.
I know you see other women. I know it.
Thomas and Teresa are fighting once again. She's jealous because he's, a womanizer. He's going around with other women. And she says that she's going back to her country town. She packs. And he tries to say, no, please stay, it's absurd to go, it's late. And she's furious, and she wants to go.
Me to them, don't leave me alone.
Teresa, calm down. Stop talking, try to sleep. You need some sleep now.
I don't want to sleep.
At one moment in the fight, we cut all of a sudden on a glass, like this, a glass on a table, and the glass is shaking like this. It's introducing a new character in the play. The two other characters do not notice the glass. Then she goes.
I can see it in your eyes.
When she goes, the telephone rings. He picks up the phone and says,
hello. Yes. What? Teresa!
We cut. It's totally artificial. We go directly to her, to the street. It's night, and she sees an enormous light coming on the opposite wall, and the first tank is coming directly towards her. At that moment, her husband goes down again and takes her in her arm, and that's the end of the scene. The Russian tanks are invading Prague. It's artificial. We had a long talk with Kundera about that scene, which is not in the book. He told me, in a book, it'd be impossible, because the coincidence would be too much. It's precisely at the moment when she leaves her husband, the very precise moment that the Russian tanks arrive. It's impossible. I mean, any reader would notice that it's too much of a coincidence. In the film, nobody ever noticed.
Why is that?
Because they are taken by the feelings, by the emotion. And they do not, there are things like this that you can't, that you are able to allow in a film, but never in a novel. In a film, you can stop. You can go back and reread again the scene on the page. You are taken away by the film, by the movement. If the emotion is right, if it is well done.
Staying in Eastern Europe, you worked with Vaida on Danton,
yeah.
Which is a magnificent film. What attracted you to that? Did you take the film to him, or did he come to you to write it?
The main thing which attracted me to Vaida was Vaida. Working on a film about French Revolution with a French director would have been much less interesting to me. What was extremely interesting was the look of something else upon our history. Exactly like the look of Buñuel upon French bourgeoisie. It's exactly the same, what we call le regard étranger, the look of a stranger. at the very beginning, the film was supposed to be shot in France, and everything was almost ready, when all of a sudden, we had the coup, the Jaruzelski coup in December 81, 80 or 81 in Poland. And the co-production was made impossible. Wajda and his assistant and the usual screenwriter was left apart in Poland. We couldn't communicate, we couldn't talk to each other. And they rewrote a new adaptation which was very much anti-militarist, against the soldiers, And this new adaptation wore all the marks of the present moment in Poland. And when the relations were established between the two countries, they came here, and I read again and I said, this is impossible, because we'd forget about Jaruzelski pretty soon, but we'll never forget about Danton. And it's totally unfair, I explained to Wajda, unfair to use Danton and Robespierre as a propaganda against Jaruzelski, even if we are very much against him. So he understood perfectly well. He understood that it was a very strange moment, because it was the history of today was changing the history of yesterday. And finally, I rewrote the film, which was entirely shot here in France. It was a huge work, and I think Wajda made a wonderful work in this film.
Et si tu continues avec ta terreur, je ne pourrai pas te suivre. Et d'ailleurs, personne ne te suivra. Et le peuple qui nous a portés déchirera la révolution.
Et qui en est coupable?
C'est pas moi. Puis c'est certainement pas toi non plus. Ben alors si nous sommes pas coupables, c'est la nature des choses.
Mais je n'ai jamais cru à la nature des choses.
Moi non plus. Moi non plus.
There is only one scene in the film when Danton and Robespierre meet.
Elles ne le sont plus.
And I felt something was missing. The scene was written, and something didn't work, really. And I felt one day that what we missed was a physical, a carnal contact between the two men. And I asked Depardieu to take Robespierre's hand and to put this hand, on his shoulder, on his, and to say, you see, you feel that flesh, you'd be forced to cut it yourself one day. And Depardieu did it wonderfully, immediately improvised. We improvised the scene. Wajda liked it very much. I wrote this, and this is probably one of the best moments in the film. It was found like this, by acting.
Je préfère être guillotiné que guillotineur.
De quoi parles-tu? Tu es complètement ivre.
Si tu t'obstines, Maxime. Tu la vois, cette tête? Tu vois cette tête? Tu la sens? Hein? Eh bien, ce sera toi qui seras obligé de la couper.
Did you have any particular problems with attempting to give an impression of period dialogue there, Jean-Claude?
You have to find a balance. It's exactly like when translating Shakespeare, for instance. You can't use an archaical French language from the period. It'd be absurd. We are not addressing an audience from the 16th or early 17th century. We are talking to people today. But in the same time, it's not an ordinary language at all. It's Shakespeare is writing. It's not anybody. So the path you have to follow is very, very narrow. You can't fall neither in the ordinary language nor in the archaical and dark and complicated. It's very, and I'm used to it, more or less. 20 years of work with Peter Brook made me a sort of used. So in Danton, it was exactly the same problem. Here we have some other sketches. This one is Godard, Jean-Luc Godard in 81. Who else? Another image of Buñuel, dreaming in Mexico. A sky like this, we don't have that in Spain. Here, I think we have, yes, the work with Peter. He's Peter Brook, working on Timon of Athens.
How did you come in contact with Peter Brook?
When he opened the Bouffe du Nord, he asked me to write the first adaptation of Time of Athens, and we have been working ever since. That's an image of the Bouffe du Nord, with the sea here. Peter is here, with some of the actors. Bruce Myers. Some other phrases, memories of the work, Maurice Bénichou, for instance. That's measure for measure. I like him a lot. I mean, working with Peter is the highest quality of work. It's a real luxury. You feel it's very pleasant, apparently, you know. It's acting, playing, talking a lot, traveling a lot, watching a lot of things, listening to a lot of people. But in the same time, this secret work I was talking about, you know, is advancing step by step. And one day it leads you to the point of writing, you know. The moment has come. You can't do otherwise. It's exactly like a plane. A plane at a certain speed can't do otherwise but by taking off.
Jean-Claude can, in an extraordinary way, enter into very styles of different people. So if he's working with a director who has himself a very, very special style, Jean-Claude's not going to disturb that. He's going to enter into it. So when I started working with him, we never talked about how he worked with other people. That had nothing to do with it.
Buñuel was like a continent by himself, you know, like a huge block of granite, you know, of Spanish stone that I have to dig my way through, you know. It was more like a concentration, and Peter is more like an exploration. Of course, even with Peter comes the very hard moment when you have to write.
He has a very, very close relationship with me, which gives me the impression that I'm the only person with whom he works. But he's very clever there, because he does that for 3 hours, and then he goes and works with someone else who also has the impression that he's the only person in Jean-Claude's life, and then another person who has that impression, and to a degree it's true. But Jean-Claude is preserving himself from the incestuous relationship. And that's why every time one comes together, there's nothing ingrown. He has done many, many other things with many other people. I've also worked apart. So there's always that pleasure of coming together with new material that one's got from the other things that one's been able to do.
Again and again, you're working with people who, by your own, you have said, you go along with them. The collaboration almost becomes a fusion. Do you find that difficult psychologically, that you have to change from being someone in control to someone who is part of this team which ends up as the directed thing?
It needs a training. It's not so easy. When I'm asked which is the most difficult way of writing you have been practicing, I said without no doubt is the screenwriting, because it needs the same qualities than writing a novel or writing a play. It needs talent, it needs work, but it needs chance, I mean, and it needs another quality, which is humility. So it needs that possibility for you to recede, to disappear step by step from the film, and to, in a certain way, yes, to sacrifice your little fame to the quality of the film.
Do you find that hard to do?
I personally not. I'm used to it, and I have other satisfactions about fame. I mean, I'm making a film about meat, so so I don't have to complain. No, not at all. I have understood for a long time ago. Because you know that at the end, the film is not going to be your film, but the film of the director, sometimes even the film of the actor.
Ah, et moi, Cyrano Savinien, Hercule de Bergerac. Aïe! Qu'est-ce encore qu'il dit? Il faut la remuer.
One of the most successful and most enjoyed and exuberant films to come out of France, I suspect, ever was Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, it was an unlikely story to catch on in modern France, the life and times of two people who die as virgins and speak in verse.
Poète? Oui, monsieur poète.
At the very beginning of the project.
Quand l'hôtel Bourguignon, monsieur de Bergerac eut avec un bel ivre. Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça, s'il vous plaît? C'est le titre.
We asked him to record a cassette of the whole play, playing all the parts, Roxane, you know. So it means that during the writing of the adaptation of the dialogue, we had the voice of Gérard all the time with us. And we used to go to the cassette and to see how he had felt the scene. And one thing is very known about Gérard, also it's a little bit of a secret. He has a fantastic body, he's very strong, massive, he's an excellent actor, but he has a rather weak voice. And the charm, the contrast in his person comes from this vulnerable voice inside a huge and strong body. And we base the whole adaptation on this contract.
Et je crois vous parler pour la première fois.
C'est vrai que vous avez une toute autre voix.
Oui, tout autre.
And it led us to the final acting of Gérard, who was very much at ease during the film, because the film was written for him at that moment.
Pardonnez mon émoi. C'est si délicieux. C'est si nouveau pour moi.
Si nouveau?
Si nouveau, mais oui, d'être sincère. La peur d'être raillé toujours au cœur me serre.
Raillé de quoi?
Mais d'un élan. Oui, mon cœur toujours de mon esprit s'habille par pudeur. Ah, l'esprit, je le hais dans l'amour.
Are there any principal guidelines to what makes a good screenplay? Why is one screenplay, would you say, why does it work so much better than another?
We have to answer that question, we have to mix two different things. One is, of course, to choose the good story to tell. There are many stories around us, and I think our first task is to choose the right one. Are we going to find it in a newspaper by you telling me what happened to you yesterday? We don't know. At the beginning, we all have to come back to our interior, to our small theater that we all have here, inside here. If we are not interested, it's needless to try. We won't interest anybody else, you know. And this word, interested, is the most mysterious of all words. He has no equivalence. He has no explication. Why are they interested or not? Nobody knows. But they are or they are not. If they are not, needless to try. Nobody else will be.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And let's start. Thank you.
Another one, a new idea. Can be shorter. Okay, bye to you there. Okay, bye. Take care.
Bonjour.